The millionaire's daughter had never walked until a single father cleaner did the unbelievable. Beverly Hills, Los Angeles. On the crest of a hill, a mansion of nearly 60,000 square feet rises among palm trees and the shimmering city lights. From the outside, it looked like a palace, so dazzling that strangers would slow their cars just to glimpse it. But inside, silence pressed down, suffocating, like the hollow air of a forgotten cathedral. In the center of the vast living room, carpeted with an ancient Persian rug, Emily Carter, 8 years old, sat motionless in her $120,000 high-tech wheelchair. She had soft brown hair and pale blue eyes, brimming with intelligence, but her body remained trapped in a cold shell. Since birth, Emily had lived with cerebral palsy. The family had brought in 15 specialists, from Harvard to Stanford, pouring tens of millions of dollars into treatments. Yet the verdict was always the same. Emily would never move. Olivia Carter, 35, Emily's mother, widow of a Silicon Valley tech mogul, now heiress to a $5 billion medical empire. Her appearance flawless, her tailored suits sharp, her every step calculated. She had it all: money, power, prestige. And yet inside this mansion there was only one undeniable truth: a mother and her unmoving child. That day, a man walked in. Not a doctor, not a specialist. Just Daniel Reyes, 42, a janitor sent by an agency as a last-minute replacement. His hands were cracked from bleach, his back bent from long night shifts, his eyes shadowed from exhaustion. A single father, he worked endless hours to support his little girl, Sophia, whom he rarely saw because of work. In this cold mansion, Daniel was meant to exist like a ghost, silently cleaning, never speaking, never looking, never stepping beyond the invisible lines drawn by wealth. He had no idea that his silent footsteps would soon echo louder than all the millions spent, awakening a miracle no doctor or machine had ever reached. Daniel Reyes was familiar with silence. For more than a decade, working in the grand buildings of Los Angeles, he had learned to walk lightly, to turn himself into a shadow in the world of the wealthy. But that evening, when the company truck dropped him in front of the massive steel gates of the Carter estate, Daniel felt as though he were stepping onto another planet. At 42, a widower for 3 years, Daniel carried not only a bag of cleaning supplies on his shoulder, but also the weight of a rugged life. Lucia, his wife, had passed away after 6 brutal months fighting cancer, leaving him alone with Sophia, who was only 2 at the time. Since then, Daniel had done everything he could: morning shifts cleaning schools, evenings in office buildings, weekends covering hospital halls. His back bent a little more each day, his hands rough and cracked, his eyes marked with permanent shadows of fatigue. But every time he saw his daughter smile, he knew he couldn't stop. Inside the Carter mansion, his rules were clear: no speaking to the owners, no direct eye contact, no stepping beyond his role as a janitor. For $10,000 a month, all Daniel had to do was remain silent and invisible. But he never expected that from the very first moment he saw Emily, something inside him would shift. She sat there in the middle of a cavernous room, so small she seemed swallowed by marble walls and Persian rugs. Emily's eyes sparkled with intelligence, yet her body lay motionless, with only the faint rise and fall of her breathing proving she was alive. A wave of sorrow, impossible to name, struck Daniel. He began to change his routine. Each morning, instead of cleaning in hidden corners, Daniel chose to mop the floor where Emily could see him. Slowly, little gestures appeared. He folded tissues into tiny birds, leaving them on the table beside her wheelchair. He gathered fallen petals from the garden and forgot them near her window. Sometimes, when light stretched across the walls, he quietly shaped his hands into shadow dogs and cats, making Emily's eyes widen as she followed each movement. Not a single word was spoken, but the silence became full of meaning. Emily started to wait for him. Every morning, her eyes tracked his steps. And when Daniel broke the unspoken rule with a quick wink, Emily nearly blushed. For the first time in years, she felt she wasn't just a living statue inside an oversized house. Daniel had no idea that these small, quiet acts were awakening something within Emily that millions of dollars in medicine had never reached: the longing to live as a real child. 3 silent months had passed. Every day Emily watched Daniel, and every day Daniel quietly planted invisible seeds of hope. But one Saturday morning, something unexpected happened. That day, Sophia's grandparents were sick, and her preschool was closed. Daniel had no choice but to bring his daughter along. Before entering the Carters' steel gates, he crouched down, placing his hands gently on Sophia's shoulders. "Sophia, today you must be very good. Stay in the storage room. Don't come out, okay?" She nodded, her dark, round eyes sparkling, clutching her dead iPad as if it were treasure. But Sophia's promise lasted no more than 5 minutes. A blue butterfly slipped through the crack of the door, and she followed it. Her tiny footsteps echoed across the marble floor, leading her straight into the living room, where Emily sat motionless, as always. 2 pairs of eyes met, one from a world of bright lights and scarcity, the other from a world of cold luxury and solitude. They stared at each other in silence, like 2 strange beings meeting on a distant planet. Sophia was the first to break the barrier. "Does your chair fly like the superheroes in X-Men?" Her innocence struck the heavy air like lightning. Emily's eyes widened, and then she laughed, a laugh so unfamiliar, trembling, but real. The first sound of joy in years. Sophia grinned, pressing forward. "Oh, that's too bad. I can't fly either, but I can do flips." And with that, she threw herself onto the expensive Persian rug, tumbling clumsily, crashing headfirst, then bouncing up in a burst of giggles. Emily laughed again, louder this time, her crystalline sound filling the cavernous room. Then the impossible happened. Emily lifted her small hand toward Sophia. Only a few inches of movement, but it was the first time in 8 years that her body defied the verdict of dozens of doctors. In that fleeting moment, 2 worlds, a wealthy girl imprisoned in her unmoving body, and a poor girl chasing butterflies, found each other, and from there, the miracle began. But that fragile miracle was quickly threatened. The sharp echo of high heels thundered down the hallway, forceful and relentless, like hammer blows. The door swung open, and Olivia Carter appeared. Her blonde hair tied neatly, her tailored suit clinging perfectly, her face carved in stone. She froze for a heartbeat at the sight. Emily laughing, something so rare it stunned her. But instead of wonder, fury surged when she saw the cause. A strange little girl, dressed plainly, sitting on the priceless Persian rug, holding her daughter's hand. And beside them, Daniel, the janitor she paid to be invisible, standing there as witness. "Daniel!" Her voice sliced through the air. "What do you think you're doing? Get that girl out of here right now. This is no place for cheap games." Every word rang with disdain. Daniel opened his mouth, searching for words, but Sophia clung tighter to Emily, her child's eyes filled with innocent defiance. Emily trembled, her smile fading, fear spreading across her delicate face. Olivia strode forward, heels striking the marble in sharp succession, her hand reaching out to pull Sophia away. The air thickened, as if the miracle that had just sparked would be smothered in an instant. And then it happened. The impossible. Emily's right foot moved, only 2 inches, but deliberate, willed, reaching for Sophia. The first movement in 8 years, shattering every cold medical report. "Stay." The word fell fragile from Emily's lips, yet it struck the room like lightning, impossible to ignore, impossible to deny. Olivia froze, her hand suspended in midair. Sophia blinked in surprise, then broke into a radiant smile, clutching her new friend even tighter. Daniel could barely breathe. His heart pounded wildly as he realized he was witnessing what millions of dollars and dozens of doctors had never achieved. For an instant, Olivia, the woman who had spent her entire life commanding, controlling, buying, felt her knees weaken. Her entire world trembled. The living room fell into silence. Not the cold silence of an empty house, but a sacred one, where a fragile miracle had just been born. And in the center, bathed in light from the tall windows, Emily smiled faintly, as if to say, "I've found a reason to move." After that earth-shattering morning, Olivia couldn't sleep. All night she sat in her office, surrounded by stacks of medical files and thick reports. Every single one concluded the same. Emily would never move voluntarily. Yet Olivia had seen it with her own eyes. That tiny foot shifting 2 inches, that single whispered word. A truth undeniable, no matter what the numbers said. So the next day, Olivia did something she had never done before. She allowed Sophia to return, but only for 1 hour each day, under strict supervision. Daniel bowed his head in gratitude, still fearing he might lose his job, but Emily's eyes lit up as though the sun had finally risen inside the cold mansion. Sophia walked into the living room carrying a small bag, not filled with luxury toys or designer dolls, but with treasures from a thrift store. A one-armed Barbie, a teddy bear stitched and restitched, a handful of worn crayons. "This is my most special princess," Sophia said, placing the broken Barbie into Emily's lap. "She's strong because she's different, and I think you are too." Emily stared at the cheap toy, her lips trembling, then broke into laughter, a sound so sweet that Olivia, hidden behind the doorway, felt her chest tighten. Playtime began. Sophia chattered endlessly, building whole worlds where princesses in wheelchairs saved kingdoms, where torn teddy bears became brave warriors. Emily couldn't say much, but her eyes sparkled, her hand twitching as she tried to reach for the Barbie. After 15 minutes, the second miracle happened. Emily held the doll by herself, her fingers trembling, but steady. Daniel, pretending to polish a vase already shining, felt his vision blur with tears. Olivia, behind the door, clenched her fists to keep herself from sobbing. The mansion that had once been a tomb of silence now echoed with children's laughter. And each day, that single hour became a medicine no millions of dollars could ever buy. In the days that followed, the Carter mansion began to change, little by little. Each afternoon, when Sophia arrived with her bag of worn-out toys, the light in Emily's eyes flickered on, as if someone had flipped a switch inside her. Laughter rang out, and Sophia's wild, fantastical stories became new music echoing through a house, once used only to the click of heels and the hum of private meetings. Olivia kept her distance. She often stood behind the heavy wooden doors, silently watching. At first with suspicion, then confusion, and eventually something more fragile. One afternoon she had to cover her mouth to stifle a sob as she saw her daughter, the girl who had sat frozen like a statue, reach out her arm, take the Barbie from Sophia's hand, and hold it. It was no longer an illusion, no longer a lucky twitch. It was a true action, conscious, purposeful. Olivia leaned against the wall, feeling her once solid worldview crumbling. For years, she had poured millions into advanced medicine, summoned professors and specialists from around the globe, yet the thing that moved her daughter was nothing more than a poor girl with worn shoes. Daniel was different. He stayed quiet, sticking to his duties, polishing a vase already gleaming, sweeping the same corner over and over, just to have an excuse to linger and witness the miracles. Each time Emily moved, his chest tightened, not from fear, but from knowing his daughter had given Emily what he himself never could, a reason to live. One evening, Olivia could no longer resist. She stepped into the living room where Sophia had laid out her dolls. Daniel stiffened, certain he was about to be scolded, but Olivia lowered herself onto the Persian rug, her expensive suit brushing against its fabric. The room froze. Emily stared at her mother, trembling with hope. Sophia, innocent as always, held out a Barbie. "Do you want to play?" The world seemed to hold its breath. Olivia hesitated, then, for the first time in years, she reached out her hand and touched the cheap doll. Emily's mouth fell open, her eyes glistening. In the weeks that followed, Emily's fragile miracle kept blossoming. From the trembling of a single finger came the steady grasp of a one-armed doll. From the awkward twitch of an arm came a tight embrace around the teddy bear Sophia had brought her. Every small milestone burned like a flame, warming the coldest corners of the mansion. What once felt like a marble museum now pulsed with laughter, as though life itself was returning. Then one afternoon, as golden sunlight streamed through the tall windows, Sophia clasped Emily's hand and whispered, "I believe you can stand. You just have to try." The words, innocent yet daring, sounded like a challenge thrown at destiny. Daniel heard them, his heart tightening. Olivia nearly panicked. "No, it's too dangerous. The doctors warned us." But Daniel met Olivia's eyes, his voice steady, resolute. "Let her try. Sometimes faith matters more than every diagnosis." The room held its breath. Sophia stood on one side, her tiny hand stretched out like a lifeline. Olivia on the other, fear and hope clashing in her gaze. Daniel knelt behind, his arms open, ready to catch. Emily set her frail hands on the armrests of her chair. Her face twisted with strain, her body trembling with effort. Drops of sweat slid down her forehead, mingling with her shallow, urgent breaths. Time seemed frozen. A millimeter, then another. Slowly her body rose, as if pushing back against an entire mountain pressing down on her. And then she stood. Her fragile legs quivered, straining to hold her upright. But for those 3 fleeting seconds, Emily stood tall, her eyes locked on Sophia's, glowing like sunlight tearing through storm clouds. When her strength gave way, her knees buckled, her body tipped forward. In an instant, Daniel caught her, wrapping her firmly in his arms. Olivia burst into sobs. Sophia shrieked with joy, bouncing on the rug like an athlete who had just won the world championship. In that moment, Olivia and Daniel's eyes met. No longer the cold heiress and the invisible janitor. They were simply 2 parents, their hearts trembling in unison, witnesses to their daughter's first miracle. Those 3 short seconds when Emily stood on her own feet changed everything. No one could deny it anymore. Olivia, the woman who once believed money could buy every solution, now had to admit, what her daughter needed wasn't another doctor, another machine, or another $1,000,000 plan. It was simply a reason to laugh, and a hand that would never let go. That night, Olivia sat beside Emily's bed. The little girl slept soundly, her cheeks still flushed from her extraordinary effort. Olivia stroked her soft hair, overcome with emotions she hadn't felt in years. She recalled Sophia cheering, Daniel catching Emily in his arms, and herself weeping with joy. In that moment, Olivia realized this enormous house had never been a home. It was only an empty shell filled with silence. And before drifting into sleep, Emily whispered with gentle but firm resolve, "Mom, I want them to stay. I want Sophia and Mr. Daniel to live here with us." Olivia froze. All her life, she had been used to buying, ordering, eliminating anything that didn't fit. But this request from her daughter, was undeniable. Emily's eyes had shone so brightly when she said it that Olivia felt if she said no, the fragile miracle would shatter. 2 days later, Daniel and Sophia moved into the east wing of the Carter mansion, not as servants, but as family. Sophia ran down the long hallways, leaving tiny footprints on the carpets. For the first time in years, Emily insisted on leaving her private room to sit in the living room, because that's where her friend was. Slowly, the mansion transformed. At the dining table, once cold and sterile, now came the clatter of dishes and warm conversation. The living room, once silent, was cluttered with dolls, teddy bears, and messy drawings. On the marble staircase, bursts of laughter echoed like music. One evening, Olivia paused in the hallway, listening to Emily and Sophia singing a nursery rhyme at the top of their lungs. She leaned against the wall, her eyes brimming with tears. At last, after all these years, her mansion had become a home. When news of Emily's first steps spread, the press began to take notice. At first, it was whispers in medical circles, then tabloids hungry for scandal. Within weeks, photos of Olivia Carter, the famously cold heiress, with a janitor by her side, had become the hottest topic in town. The tech heiress and the janitor. Olivia Carter's new pastime? True love across classes, or just a cruel joke? Sensational headlines flooded the media, and social networks buzzed with gossip. At lavish parties, Olivia found herself surrounded by whispers. But instead of retreating, she chose to face them head-on. One evening, at a Beverly Hills charity gala, a wealthy businesswoman smirked and asked Olivia in front of the entire table, "Are you seriously getting involved with a janitor? Olivia, surely you deserve someone of a higher caliber?" The air froze, but Olivia lifted her chin, her gaze proud and unwavering. "That man has done what $20 million and dozens of doctors could not. He made my daughter move, laugh, and find a reason to live. He's worth more than all the wealth in this room." The ballroom fell silent. Daniel, standing quietly in the corner, said nothing, but his eyes glistened. In that moment, he no longer felt like an intruder in Olivia's world. He was a father, and now recognized as an essential part of the miracle called Emily. As for the two girls, Sophia and Emily cared nothing for adult gossip. Their world was made of afternoon doll games, comic books, and bursts of giggles echoing through the hallways. But in their innocence, they were weaving an invisible thread that kept pulling Daniel and Olivia closer together. One night, after tucking the girls into bed, Daniel and Olivia crossed paths in the kitchen. No expensive suits, no janitor's uniform, just a tired man and a woman shedding her icy mask. They laughed, awkwardly at first, then warmly. And when Olivia placed her hand gently on Daniel's arm, he realized, within this house, despite all the judgment outside, something new had begun to bloom. Love. But the love that had just begun was quickly forced to face its greatest trial. The media, already circling, now pounced like wolves on prey. A video went viral, Emily taking a few steps, with a cruel caption. "The girl was never truly paralyzed. It's all a performance for attention." Headlines erupted. Daniel, a hired actor? Olivia staging a hoax to boost her company's value? The poisonous accusations spread like wildfire. Paparazzi camped outside the Carter gates. Drones hovered over the mansion, lenses aimed at every window. Sophia cried in terror. And Emily, brave as she was, trembled when she heard the shouts from outside. "Fraud! Great acting, kid!" Olivia fought the storm head-on, but even she couldn't hold back the tide. Then came the sharpest blow. Her father, Richard Carter, founder of the medical empire, summoned her to headquarters. In a cold boardroom, he laid down two options. "You must choose, Olivia, family or company. If you choose that man, don't expect to keep this empire." His voice was low, steely. Olivia froze, her fists clenched so tightly her palms bled. But when she thought of Emily, of her daughter's radiant smile whenever Sophia was near, she knew how cruel this ultimatum truly was. Meanwhile, Daniel was torturing himself. He felt like a storm dragging Olivia and Emily into danger. One night, as Sophia shook from the angry voices outside, he whispered, "Maybe we should leave. Maybe that's the only way to keep them safe." The next morning, Daniel packed his bags. But before he could step past the iron gates, a cry split the air behind him. "Don't go!" Emily, pale and trembling, was forcing herself forward on fragile legs. She stumbled toward him, each step shaky but her eyes blazing. Twice she fell, and twice she pushed herself back up, determined. At last she collapsed into Daniel's arms, gasping, and whispered with desperate strength, "If you leave, I won't walk anymore. I walk because of us." In that instant, the storm outside seemed to fall silent. After the moment Emily collapsed into Daniel's arms, Olivia knew she could no longer stay silent. She was no longer the cold heiress bowing to public opinion, nor the frightened daughter trembling before her father's threats. Olivia was now a mother, ready to fight for her child. 3 days later, UCLA Medical Center overflowed with reporters. More than 300 journalists packed the halls, cameras broadcasting live nationwide. The event was dubbed the Carter Press Conference, and America held its breath. Before Olivia spoke, Professor Yamamoto, a renowned neurologist from Tokyo, once hired by Olivia with a $150,000 contract, presented the evidence. On the screen appeared MRI scans, medical records, 8 years of video footage. His voice was firm. "There is no doubt. Emily Carter was born with cerebral palsy. No one could pretend for 8 years. What we are witnessing is not fraud, but a phenomenon unprecedented in medicine." The room buzzed. Cameras turned as Olivia walked to the podium, her gaze unwavering. She no longer hid, no longer wore the icy mask. Her voice rang out steady and clear. $20 million failed. Dozens of doctors had no answers. But one little girl with worn shoes and a humble father did what money could not. They gave Emily a reason to walk. "If this makes Carter's stock collapse, so be it. I will not trade my family for a company." Then she turned, nodding softly. Emily appeared, struggling with each step, but determined to reach the microphone. The hall fell silent. She placed her small hands on the podium, her voice trembling but clear. "I couldn't walk, but now I can, because I have Sophia, my best friend, and Daniel, the dad I want." Silence hung for a beat. Then Sophia shouted from the front row, "And I want Olivia to be my mom." In an instant, the hall erupted. No more jeers, no more doubts, only thunderous applause, cameras flashing, and tears streaming down reporters' faces. The story of love and miracles had risen far above scandal. After the triumphant press conference, with America in tears over Emily's story, it seemed as though the trials were finally over. But truth never lets go so easily. Just a week later, an investigative paper broke the story. Daniel Reyes's brother currently serving time for drug trafficking. Headlines flared. Carter family tainted by criminal past? Olivia's love? Just another mistake? Daniel felt drained of all strength. He sat motionless in the small room of the East Wing, staring at a suitcase he had never unpacked. For years he had hidden the truth about Luis, the younger brother who had lost himself to darkness. Daniel had done everything, taken extra night shifts, scraped together every dollar for a lawyer, even visited in prison. But he had never told anyone, not even Olivia, afraid of being judged. When Olivia entered, Daniel confessed, his voice breaking, "I kept this from you. Luis, he ruined his life, and I couldn't save him. I don't want to drag you and Emily down with me." Olivia was silent, her eyes glistening. Then she sat beside him, her hand gently covering his. "Do you think you're the only one carrying scars? My brother Sebastian died of an overdose at 19. Out of that grief, my father built this entire medical empire as his penance. Daniel, the past cannot be erased, but it can become the reason we save others." In that moment, Daniel looked at Olivia with new eyes. Not as a cold heiress, not as a woman too far beyond him, but as a soul wounded in the same way. Then 2 little girls came running in, Sophia and Emily, throwing their arms around them, their laughter cutting through the night. And Daniel understood. The past was no longer a chain to bind him, but proof that true love accepts even the shadows. After days of facing the public and confronting their past, Olivia and Daniel finally decided on a beautiful ending. A wedding, small, intimate, without extravagance or spectacle. All that mattered was having Emily, Sophia, and the few people who truly cared. It seemed happiness was finally within reach, but fate had one more trial in store. 1 week before the ceremony, Emily suddenly relapsed. The legs that had been making steady progress no longer obeyed her. Doctors rushed back, shaking their heads, warning of regression, the result of pushing her body too far. Olivia nearly broke. Daniel sat by her bed all night, his hands clenched, eyes filled with helplessness. Emily didn't cry, but her eyes carried a deep sadness. Whispering to Sophia when only the two of them were in the room, she said, "What if everything changes after the wedding? What if Mom gets busy? What if Mr. Daniel isn't here anymore? What if I go back to how I was?" Sophia shook her head fiercely, hugging her tight. "No, we won't let that happen. This new family won't disappear." Sophia understood. Emily wasn't losing her ability to walk because her body failed, but because her heart was afraid. Afraid the miracle would vanish once the wedding was over, when life returned to the dull routine of adults. So Olivia, Daniel, and Sophia did something they had never done before. They moved into Emily's room. They brought blankets and pillows, laid mattresses on the floor, ate together, slept together, filling the sterile white walls with laughter and warmth. The medical room became a fortress of family. 3 days later, Emily stood up again. Not dramatically, not with tears. She simply walked into the bathroom, washed her face, then returned to the table, whispering, "I just needed to be sure that no one would leave me." And in the shining eyes of Olivia and Daniel, Emily knew. The true miracle was not her legs, but the love that kept them together. The wedding day arrived on a gloomy morning. The Los Angeles sky hung heavy, dark clouds pressing down, and then rain poured in torrents. The wedding planners panicked, phones buzzing with frantic calls, terrified the ceremony would be ruined. But when Olivia looked out into the garden and saw Emily laughing with Sophia under the rain, she couldn't help but smile. "Let it be. We don't need a perfect day. We just need a real one." And so, instead of postponing, they carried on. The ceremony unfolded in the soaked garden, wooden chairs dripping with rain, silk dresses clinging with water, yet never had anything looked more radiant. Emily wore a small white dress, serving as maid of honor. Sophia walked beside her, clutching wildflowers picked hastily from the yard. Halfway down the aisle, Emily stumbled and fell. The entire crowd held its breath, but she laughed, pushed herself up, and kept walking, wobbly but proud. The audience erupted into applause. Olivia, in a simple wedding gown, rain and tears mingling on her face, held Daniel's trembling hand tightly. He could hardly believe that he, once just a lonely janitor, now stood here beside the woman who once seemed as distant as a star. When they exchanged rings, Emily suddenly stepped forward, her legs steadier than ever. She took Olivia and Daniel's hands, lifted her chin, and said clearly, "Now we are a family. For real." The rain kept falling, but no one cared. Amid cheers and applause, love was sealed, not by luxury, but by faith and the miracle they had built together. After the wedding, the Carter mansion was no longer a cold fortress of power. It had become the home where love and miracles lived. Marble walls that once echoed with the click of heels now rang with the laughter of 2 little girls. Persian rugs, once untouchable, bore wet footprints and streaks of crayon from Sophia and Emily's drawing sessions. The grand piano, worth hundreds of thousands, now held messy sheets of childish compositions, off-key but bursting with joy. Daniel had taken on a new role, director of the Carter Foundation for Children, where disabled kids were treated not only with machines, but with friendship, play, and companionship. Olivia, once hidden behind walls of icy power, now found happiness in the simplest evenings. A family dinner, an unexpected hug, a lullaby whispered before bed. Emily had managed more than 10 steps in a row, her personal record. But when asked what made her happiest, she smiled, pointed at Sophia, and said, "Because I have my friend, I want to walk." On a quiet afternoon, the four of them sat on the porch, Olivia and Daniel hand in hand, Sophia and Emily running across the dewy grass. The sky held no rain, but in their eyes lingered the memory of the wedding in the rain, the day that proved true miracles never came from money, but from love shared. And so at last that house, once a palace of silence, had become what it was always meant to be, the house of miracles.